Okay, so this is a video I've wanted to do for a long time. A lot of what we do at Souls Remember and a lot of the passion I've had for 30 plus years is studying near death experiences. And there's obviously a lot of momentum and a lot of conversation around near death experiences right now, which I think is great. There's a couple things I want to talk about regarding NDEs, though, that most people aren't talking about. And so this is a quick video where we're going to talk about the most common elements of an NDE. And then I'm going to talk to you about a few things that almost nobody really talks about. And I think it's worth having a real conversation about. So first of all, let's dive into what an NDE is. Obviously, if you studied it for a long time, you don't need to know this, but near-death experiences are anybody who has passed away, been clinically dead, close to or clinically dead, and has gone to the other side and come back with a story. And I think that's really important because, one of the things that I've always thought is that in life, this life we live, it's either all perfection or it's all chaos. There's nowhere in between. And if you believe that life there are no accidents and life has some perfection, an element of perfection to it, then one of the things to think about is that if somebody goes home and comes back with a story, that's part of the plan. That's a perfect part of the plan. And I believe that that is a way that we're helping increase, quote unquote, revelation. We're increasing the conversation. We're leaving breadcrumbs for ourselves in creation to say, hey, this is the thing we should be paying attention to. And that's going to be relevant to some of the things I think nobody's talking about right now, or very few people are talking about in terms of NDEs. So, okay, if somebody has an NDE, there's a lot of really common elements, right? It's really common for them to go through a separation from their body and to be able to see their body from a different angle or from multiple angles at the same time. Usually, if they're in a hospital, they're floating above their body. They are able to see it. Sometimes they don't recognize their body, but there is a genuine detachment from the chaos and what's happening around that moment. Now, sometimes people recognize that they're dead and sometimes they don't immediately. Very often there's someone there with them, or there's some kind of energy that's pulling them, or a being that's pulling them away from the body and taking them somewhere. So sometimes they spend a little bit of time in that space, and they're able to travel great distances or travel through solid objects because they're in spirit. They're not necessarily aware of them having any kind of a form anymore. So that's something that's really common with all NDEs. Another thing is that they feel a gravity pull. They feel something that pulls them away from their body, away from that, the trauma or the chaos of what's happening. And they either enter into a tunnel or they enter into a really bright light. That's a super common result of where people are going. And when they get to where they're going, if they go through a tunnel, they very often exit the tunnel into a bright light. They describe it as the most brilliant light, a light that contains love, that contains unconditional love in it. That is, the light is a being, not just a place. Sometimes people will see, in addition to that light, they will see loved ones in that space. They will see people who have gone before. They will see people they remember from maybe a previous existence in that space. So there's quite a bit of variableness in what happens when people get to that bright light. If with a loved one, or they're with their guide, or they're with a being, and some people see Jesus or their creator or their deity right there at that spot. Some people are busy having conversations telepathically, is another thing everybody talks about. They don't use words. With the beings that are on that side. The fact that there's beings there is something else that's really important. We're going to talk about in terms of the things nobody else is really speaking about NDEs, and I think there's some important things to discuss around that. And then very often, and by the way, sometimes they don't go to a room. Sometimes that bright light is a room. Sometimes it's nature. Sometimes it's a building, a white marble column building. There's a wide variety of things that happen when people go to the other side. And I think that's important too. We'll talk about that in a second. The differences in the landscape, or the differences in the geography, so to speak, spiritual geography of where they land. So in addition, then, there's usually at that point some kind of a life review. There's something that happens at that point where they are spending some time holographically or on a screen or in some way reviewing their life. They're usually doing that with a divine being next to them. And more than not, that is a dual review of their life with somebody that's, that's showing them massive amounts of compassion and understanding and awareness and love. That's something that's really important. And there's a wide variety of the way that life review shows up for people. And then they'll often talk about how that life review was very detailed. It went through all of the moments from their birth. And very often they talk about how they're able to see the things that happened in their life, not just from their own perspective, but also from the perspective of the people that they either loved or hurt or were part of the drama or trauma in those life experiences. And they're able to see that all the way through and watch that ripple as it expands. A lot of people will talk about how they don't know how much time really elapsed during that life review, because there's obviously a lot of things to go through. So, but every single one talks about how there was no judgment. There's an awareness. There's I could have done that better, or I really didn't mean to hurt that person, or some good stuff, obviously, too. But there's no judgment. There's no pain. There's no condemnation about that life review, even with the awareness of what we could have done better. There is then often some kind of a barrier between where they are and where they could go. But if they were to go beyond that barrier, they're not going to come back. And so there's usually a conversation at some point that says, okay, this is not your time. It's time for you to go back. And some people are hesitant and don't want to. And some people do want to go back and do want to do a better job. So there's a bit of variance in how that unfolds. I think that's kind of cool. But notice that it's sometimes they're given a choice, and sometimes it's just a part of reality. But in everybody that went and came back made the decision to come back. And that's kind of a foregone conclusion, right? But there's always, in almost every case, an acclimation period that's painful when people get back to their bodies. There's some depression a lot of times, and there's I don't want to be here. There's an awareness that they're in a confined, tight, limited space now, way different than where they came from, which is interesting, right? Because when we're born, if that veil was not placed between us and our past, a remembrance of that past life, none of us would want to be here. But the fact that veil is very often removed permanently from somebody when they come back after a near-death experience like that is really telling to me. And those are the really common elements that exist in all NDEs. Now, there's some things that aren't very common and aren't talked about a lot. And I think some of these things are the most important things. And one of them is that when somebody comes back, they very often come back with a mission to do better. They come back because they're able to see the difference that they would make if they came back. They're able to visually see that somehow. And they made the choice to come back and be part of the solution. They come back with a story. That veil is not then placed over their eyes. They come back with an awareness of who they really are and what this life is actually about, which eliminates a lot of the fear about dying. But you could see how that would add a lot of homesickness and some difficulty. Now, all the near-death experiences you hear that happened 20, 30 years ago, there was very little conversation around it. In fact, there were mostly negative connotation types of discussions around near-death experiences 20 or 30 years ago. It's a much more accepted and aware happening right now than it was before. So I hope that it's easier for people to talk about when they come back now, and it's more, and people are more aware of it and more understanding, and it can be part of a better part of the conversation. But you can see how 20, 30 years ago, somebody may come back and not wanted to talk about it. There's also some people that come back and they didn't want to come back. They didn't feel a tie necessarily to come back to their families specifically. And maybe that's a hard discussion to have. Maybe it's hard to say, yeah, I know I needed to come back because God told me, or Christ, or whoever the being that they were with, their guide, told them, you need to come back. It's not your time. But I didn't want to. That's a hard thing to say to people that are back here on earth that are grieving. That would be a difficult conversation to have with people. So most people very likely don't have that conversation then. I think that one of the things that's not talked about very often is that when someone got to the other side, there wasn't one right religion. There wasn't one path to get there. Everybody, no matter what their life was like, got there. And I think it's interesting to study the NDEs of people who maybe don't go right to that white. They go to a darker place and they have some trauma, or they go to what they would describe as hell. And you'll notice in every NDE that we hear about like that hell was timeless. So I understand why the churches would say you go to hell forever, because if there's no time, then forever is forever. But in each of those cases of people who died with an NDE and came back and they went to that experience in hell, so to speak, there was a point where they called on God, they called on Jesus, they called on the light, they asked to be rescued, and they were. And I think that's a really critical component to think about, that every one of those people that ever had that experience came back after having been saved. But there isn't one path to get there, and nobody gets there and says, you chose the wrong church. I remember a really funny cartoon by the creators of South Park. I'll see if I can find it and play it. But that cracks me up. It's a cartoon about having chosen the wrong religion when you got there. Dang it, we're in hell. We chose the wrong religion.
Where are we? What's happening? Hello, newcomers, and welcome. Can everybody hear me? Hello? Can everybody? Okay. I'm the Hell Director. It looks like we have about 8,615 of you newbies today. And for those of you who were a little confused, you are dead, and this is Hell. So abandon all hope and yada, yada, yada. We're now going to start the orientation process, which will last about... Hey, wait a minute. I shouldn't be here. I was a totally strict and devout Protestant. I thought we went to heaven. Yes, well, I'm afraid you were wrong.
I was a practicing Jehovah's Witness.
You picked the wrong religion as well.
Well, who was right? Who gets into heaven?
I'm afraid it was the Mormons. Yes, the Mormons were the correct answer.
And that doesn't exist. And there isn't one path. There isn't one deity. There isn't one version of God. Everybody goes and has a myriad of different experiences, and they all have that divinity, and they all have that life review, and not one of them comes back with a story that's like, I should have joined that church. I came back and God told me that I should have joined that church, and I'm gonna do it at all costs now. Nobody comes back with that story, which means something amazing. If the process of having a near-death experience is purposeful and part of the plan, and we're using it to leave ourselves breadcrumbs about who we are, why we're here, and it's being delivered to us as prophecy or behind the scenes awareness of what's really going on and what we're really here, and those teachers are coming back to teach us and inform us about what's real, we should look at it like that. We should look at it as evidence. I think it's past the point where we're in question of whether or not it's evidence, but read between the lines a little bit. The evidence is that nobody gets there and says, you joined the wrong church, man. Otherwise, you would be here with us, but you got to go there to the dark place. Nobody ever says that. Nobody ever goes there and is not welcome and is not recognized and is not loved unconditionally in a way that they can't describe. Everyone describes the level of love that they experience there as something that's indescribable here, a level of love, a kind of love that what we have here is just a small light version of, right? They talk about the colors like that too, but nobody goes there and comes back with an awareness that they have to join a different church. I think that's super important. Nobody goes there with the awareness that somebody was keeping tabs and they had 9,287,000 positive things, but 27 more bad things, and so they're going to go to hell. Nobody's keeping the ledger like that. And the things that they did do that hurt other people, there was an awareness about, and there was an awareness that we could have done better, but there wasn't a judgment about it. And if everything's perfect, everything happens for a perfect reason, then there's an awareness around that too. And I think it's important to know that when when people come home, there's pain often in them re-entering their body. But one of the great things that I notice in NDEs is that there is very little or no pain when they leave. Even when people have a traumatic death around an accident, they don't describe it as having this unreasonable amount of pain and then they popped out of their body. Some of the near-death stories that I remember the most are the stories where people were in trauma and they should have been in pain and instead they were in peace. And I think that's evidence of a loving and divine creator who doesn't want us to feel unnecessary pain. When they come back to their body, there's a squishing in process. There's the pain that comes with being mortal, especially in a broken and bruised body, or maybe in a feeling of being confined. But that's part of the process, and that's probably why we don't remember very much when we were babies. The acclimation of that is difficult. But I think those things are really important for us to remember when we're thinking about near-death experiences. The fact that we came back, and if we came back, it's part of a perfect plan, and we did that for a reason. If somebody came back and told us the story, they're setting a breadcrumb in place for you to be able to remember who you actually are. And along all of the common things that happen, there's also a billion different variations of the way that looks, just like in this life. There's 8 billion of us here living our own version of this experience. None of them are exactly the same. And thank goodness we all don't go to the same room when we die. Thank goodness we all don't go to the same collection center and ride the same shuttle bus and get to the same building with the same name on the door, right? We all go home. We all go where we were before, with the people we were with before, with the spirits we were there before. And that brings me to my final thing. I'm a big believer in that, and have been for as long as I can remember, that there's no way you can fail with this life. There is no way. Every path leads home, just like all roads lead to Rome. Every path on this earth leads home. And part of that is that home is a place where it's eternity. It's where we come from. We've always been there and we'll always be there. But in eternity, you can't also have time and space. You can't have duality. It's here that we have duality. And I think it's really interesting that when people die and they go to this place that there is some version of duality. There's an awareness that they are all one and they're all connected. But this acclimation process allows them to have 1 foot in duality and 1 foot out, which I think is really interesting. It means to me that, and maybe this only happens for people that are coming home. Maybe if you die and you're not coming home, there's no need to have a holding area. There's no need for a middle ground. You just go right back into wholeness and merge with the creator and merge with the unity of it all. Maybe that's the case. I don't know. But none of us know, because nobody's ever come back from that. But the ones that do come back talk about a lot of things that look like and feel like duality. The awareness that some things were good and some things were not so good in their life review. The awareness that there's a me and there's a guide. There's me and there's my loved ones. There's a here and we go to this building and there's a there. Those are all things that are duality. And duality doesn't exist and can't exist in a place where there's eternity. Time and space can exist in that space. And so I think it's really interesting. If you read between the lines, I think you can get a feel for why this is. I think it's really interesting that our creator, our God, gives us a middle ground where we can acclimate to both areas, where we can see the reasons why we'd want to go back, where we can have 1 foot in and 1 foot out. We can feel the unity and feel the oneness and feel the love and feel the unconditionalness of it and that awareness. But we can also recognize that when we come back, we're going to be coming back and talking about duality. We're going to be coming back and having a conversation that has some recognition to this space as well. I think that's really amazing that it was designed that way, that we created it that way. And I think that the number of near-death experiences that are happening, the conversations around them, the openness about it, is part of why we're awakening right now. We're receiving prophecy in a way, if you understand. We're not just relying on religious leaders to tell us what God is. Our friends and neighbors are going home and coming back and telling us what God is. And that's pretty cool. I like it. I think it's one of the reasons that I've studied NDEs for so long. Souls Remember podcast will have, and we have booked a ton of NDEers that will come on and talk about that experience. You'll see a bunch that come out in the next month or so, or two, and on. I think it's a critical conversation. It's one of the big conversations that we want to have as we, as souls, remember who we are and remember back together. That's the point of Souls Remember, is to help us remember and join again back into that unity consciousness and go home and have peace and make this a heaven on earth. That's the whole goal here, is to make this a heaven on earth. And I hope that the stuff we do at this channel helps you. And anyway, that's just some of the easy stuff to know about NDEs, and then some of the things that I think are not talked about as much. And you'll see as I'm interviewing guests on NDEs, those are the questions I'm going to ask, or those in between the line questions that aren't talked about as much. So hope you enjoy it. Thanks for listening. And as always, I really appreciate you subscribing and liking it and giving us the ability to continue to do what we want to do to help everybody wake up and shift and live a fifth dimensional life and be able to find peace and love and joy on this planet and make it a heaven on earth. Like it's going to happen anyway. So we're just trying to help it along a little bit. In the meantime, hope you feel peace. So please like and subscribe. Would really appreciate that a ton. Thanks for listening.